It was the kind of bitterly cold December night where even the moon seemed reluctant to shine. Martin, freshly out of a bad breakup and eager for distraction, had volunteered to house-sit for his sister. She and her family were spending Christmas in Europe, leaving their sprawling suburban home and their energetic golden retriever, Max, in Martin's hands. The house was decked out for the holidays, with twinkling lights wrapped around every window frame, a wreath hung on the front door, and a perfectly decorated Christmas tree dominating the living room. To the outside world, it looked festive and inviting, but Martin found the emptiness unnerving. It was too big, too quiet, especially on a night like this. He had just settled onto the couch with a beer, Max curled up at his feet, when his phone buzzed. A notification from an unknown number popped up. "Are you ready for your Christmas surprise?" Martin frowned. He assumed it was spam and ignored it. But a few seconds later, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a picture. His sister's front yard, taken from the perspective of someone standing just beyond the porch. Martin shot up, his heart hammering. He locked the door earlier. He was sure of it. "Max, come here," he whispered, instinctively pulling the dog closer. Max's ears perked up, and he stared intently at the door. Another message came through. "It's rude not to answer the door." As if on cue, there was a knock. Not just any knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps that seemed to reverberate through the house. Knock, knock, knock. Martin froze. He checked the time. It was almost midnight. Who would be out there in this freezing cold? His mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. He peered through the peephole, half expecting to see a neighbor or maybe even some carolers. But no one was there. He double-checked the lock and backed away from the door, his hands trembling. He was about to call his sister when another message came through. "Don't be shy, Martin. It's Christmas." How did they know his name? A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He typed a quick response. "Who is this? How do you know me?" The reply came almost instantly. "You let me in last year, remember?" Martin's blood ran cold. He had no idea what they were talking about. Last year, he'd been at his ex's family Christmas, a thoroughly uneventful affair. He was about to type back when another knock shattered the silence. Knock, knock, knock. This time, it wasn't the front door. It came from the window behind him. Martin spun around, his heart pounding. The curtains were drawn, but he could see the faint outline of a figure on the other side. Tall, still, watching. "Whoever you are, get the hell out of here," Martin shouted, trying to sound braver than he felt. The figure didn't move. Max started barking furiously, his tail rigid, his fur standing on end. The phone buzzed again. "Let me in, or I'll find my own way." Martin didn't reply. He grabbed a kitchen knife and dialed 911, keeping his eyes on the window. But the call wouldn't connect. He tried again and again, but the screen showed call failed each time. The figure outside began to move, slowly circling the house. Martin could hear footsteps crunching in the snow, deliberate and unhurried. Max barked louder, following the intruder's movements from window to window. Suddenly, the power went out. The house was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the glow of his phone. The sound of his own breathing filled his ears as he clutched the knife tighter. Then, the back door rattled. Someone was trying the handle. "Go away," Martin shouted, his voice cracking. "I'm armed and I'll call the police." The rattling stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then came the sound of breaking glass from the living room. Martin's stomach dropped. He crept toward the living room, Max by his side, growling low and deep. The Christmas tree cast eerie, shifting shadows in the faint light from the street lamps outside. One of the windows was shattered, shards of glass scattered across the floor. Snow blew in through the opening, chilling the room even further. "Martin," a voice crooned from somewhere in the darkness. It was high-pitched, almost childlike, but there was something wrong about it. Something inhuman. Max barked furiously, lunging toward the source of the voice, but Martin grabbed his collar. "Stay back," he whispered. The voice came again, closer this time. "You shouldn't have ignored me, Martin. You shouldn't have let me in." Martin's phone buzzed, but he didn't dare check it. His eyes darted around the room, searching for the source of the voice. Then he saw it. A figure stepped out from the shadows, its face obscured by a porcelain mask painted with a grotesque grin. Its body was wrapped in tattered holiday garb, an old Santa hat and a shredded red coat that hung loosely from its skeletal frame. "Let's open your present," it hissed, holding out a box wrapped in bright green paper with a blood-red bow. Martin stumbled backward, pulling Max with him. The figure advanced, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on invisible strings. He ran for the stairs, dragging Max behind him, and slammed the bedroom door shut. He pushed a dresser against it for good measure, his heart racing so fast it felt like it might burst. He could hear the thing below, laughing softly, its footsteps dragging across the hardwood floor. The phone buzzed again. Against his better judgment, he checked the message. It was a video. The grainy footage showed Martin sleeping on the couch, the Christmas tree lights twinkling behind him. The camera moved closer, zooming in on his face. A shadow loomed over him, and a hand, thin, pale, and clawed, reached out to stroke his hair. Martin dropped the phone, while rising in his throat. That hadn't happened. It couldn't have. He would have woken up, wouldn't he? A loud bang on the bedroom door jolted him back to the present. Bang, bang, bang. The thing was outside, its voice sing-song and mocking. "You can't hide forever, Martin. It's Christmas. Don't you want your present?" Martin looked around the room, desperate for a way out. The window. It was a two-story drop, but there was a snowbank below. He threw it open and climbed out, Max leaping after him. The icy air bit at his skin as he landed hard, pain shooting up his leg. He didn't look back. He ran, barefoot through the snow, the dog by his side. The laughter followed him, echoing through the still night, growing fainter with each step he took. When he finally reached the neighbor's house, he pounded on the door until they let him in. He told them everything, but when the police arrived, they found no footprints, no broken windows, no sign that anyone had been there. The only thing they found was a single gift box, sitting on the living room floor, wrapped in green paper with a red bow. Martin never opened it. The blizzard was unrelenting, its icy claws scratching at the windows of the remote cabin as Lucy unpacked the last of her bags. She had come here with her fiancé, Ryan, to escape the madness of the city and spend a quiet Christmas in the woods. It was supposed to be romantic, a time to unwind and enjoy each other's company, surrounded by nothing but snow-covered pines and the crackling warmth of the fireplace. The cabin itself was rustic but charming, a small, one-story structure with just enough modern amenities to make it comfortable. A Christmas tree, already decorated with glowing lights and old-fashioned ornaments, stood proudly in the corner of the living room. Lucy found it odd that the tree was fully set up. The Airbnb host hadn't mentioned it, but she assumed it was part of the festive charm. Ryan was fiddling with the thermostat, muttering about how the place was colder than he'd expected. "If this thing doesn't start working soon, we'll be spending Christmas as human popsicles," he joked, though Lucy could tell he was annoyed. "It's fine," Lucy said, forcing a smile. "We've got plenty of firewood, and the storm's supposed to pass by tomorrow." Ryan grunted in response and turned his attention to the fireplace. Lucy wandered into the kitchen to check the pantry. To her surprise, it was stocked with basic supplies: flour, sugar, canned goods, even though the listing had specified bringing your own food. It was thoughtful, she supposed, though something about it felt strange. Everything was so neatly arranged, almost as if no one had touched it in years. By the time the fire was roaring, the cabin felt cozier. They made dinner, laughed about the absurdity of their snowed-in holiday, and played cards by the flickering firelight. It was the kind of evening Lucy had hoped for, and for a while, she forgot about the storm raging outside. It was close to midnight when Lucy first noticed it, a faint knocking sound, barely audible over the howling wind. She froze, her hand hovering over the deck of cards. "Did you hear that?" she asked. Ryan looked up, his brow furrowed. "Hear what?" "Knocking," she said, her voice tinged with unease. "At the door." Ryan listened for a moment, then shook his head. "It's just the storm. Probably a branch hitting the roof or something." Lucy wasn't convinced, but she let it go. They played another hand of cards before calling it a night. As they climbed into bed, The wind seemed to grow louder, almost screaming against the walls of the cabin. Then the knocking came again. This time, it was louder, more deliberate. 3 sharp raps on the front door. Knock, knock, knock. Ryan sat up, his face tense. "That's not the wind," he muttered. Lucy's stomach twisted. Who would be out here in this weather? Ryan threw on a jacket and grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand. "Stay here," he said firmly, heading toward the door. "Ryan, wait." Lucy called, but he was already in the living room. She heard the door creak open, followed by the sound of snow crunching under his boots as he stepped outside. Lucy waited, her heart pounding. Minutes stretched on like hours. Finally, Ryan returned, shaking his head and dusting snow from his coat. "No one's there," he said, but there were footprints leading up to the door. Lucy's eyes widened. Footprints? Where did they go? Ryan hesitated. They just stopped, like whoever it was vanished into thin air. Lucy shivered, though the room was warm. "This isn't funny, Ryan." "I'm not joking," he said, his voice serious. "Let's just lock up and get some sleep. We'll deal with this in the morning." But sleep didn't come easily. Lucy lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every creak of the cabin sending her nerves into overdrive. Ryan, ever the rational one, was snoring softly beside her. The knocking started again at 3 a.m. This time, it was more insistent, as though whoever, or whatever, was outside was losing patience. Lucy shook Ryan awake, her voice trembling. "It's back." Ryan grabbed the flashlight and marched to the door, anger replacing his earlier caution. He flung it open, flooding the porch with light. Once again, no one was there. But something was different. A package sat on the doorstep, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Ryan picked it up cautiously, turning it over in his hands. There was no name, no address, just a single word scrawled on the top in shaky handwriting. "Open." "No way," Lucy said, backing away. "Don't open it." "It's probably just some prank," Ryan said, though his voice lacked conviction. He carried the package inside and placed it on the kitchen table. "Ryan, please," Lucy begged. "What if it's dangerous?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Fine, we'll leave it for now. But if someone shows up tomorrow looking for it, at least we'll know what's going on." Lucy didn't argue. She didn't have the energy. They locked the doors and windows again and returned to bed, but the unease lingered, settling over the cabin like a thick fog. By morning, the storm had cleared, leaving a dazzling white landscape in its wake. Lucy half expected the package to be gone, but it was still on the table, exactly where Ryan had left it. While Ryan shoveled snow from the driveway, Lucy stayed inside, unable to shake the feeling that they were being watched. She pulled back the curtains and scanned the tree line, her breath catching when she saw it, a figure, tall and gaunt, standing motionless among the pines. It wore a long, tattered coat, its face obscured by shadow. "Ryan!" Lucy shouted, but when she looked again, the figure was gone. Ryan came running, his cheeks red from the cold. "What's wrong?" "There was someone in the woods," she said, her voice shaking. "I saw them." Ryan frowned, glancing out the window. "There's no one there now. Maybe it was just a trick of the light." Lucy wanted to believe him, but she knew what she'd seen, and deep down, she knew it wasn't over. Later that afternoon, as they were chopping wood outside, the sound of faint laughter drifted through the trees. It was high-pitched, almost childlike, but there was something sinister about it. Ryan froze, the axe poised mid-swing. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Lucy nodded, her stomach churning. "We need to leave," she whispered. "Now." Ryan hesitated, then nodded. "All right, let's pack up and go." But as they hurried back to the cabin, they saw it. A new package sitting on the porch, identical to the first. This time, the word on top read, "Stay." Lucy and Ryan exchanged a terrified glance. The laughter grew louder, echoing through the forest, as if mocking them. They never made it to their car. The snow had started falling earlier than forecasted, blanketing the ground in white before the sun even began to set. Erica tightened her scarf against the cold as she stepped out of the gas station, a cup of hot coffee warming her hands. The tiny mountain town she was passing through felt like a ghost town in the growing storm, its streets empty except for the occasional car that slid cautiously along the icy roads. She glanced at her watch. The cabin her family had rented for Christmas was still an hour's drive away, and the storm was worsening by the minute. Her parents and sister had arrived the day before, but Erica had stayed behind to finish up some last-minute work. Now, alone on the winding mountain road, she was starting to regret not traveling with them. The cabin was supposed to be the perfect holiday getaway, nestled deep in the woods, secluded, quiet. But as the snow piled higher, the idea of isolation felt more ominous than appealing. The road was slippery and unlit, and Erica's little sedan struggled to gain traction on the steep incline. She cursed under her breath, leaning forward as if that would help the car climb. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder, and she quickly glanced down to see her sister's name on the screen. "We're waiting for you," came Anna's voice, distorted slightly by static. "Mom's worried. The storm's really bad up here." I know, Erica said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the anxiety bubbling in her chest. "I'm on my way. Shouldn't be much longer." "Be careful," Anna said. "And if you have to, just pull over and wait it out. It's better than getting stranded in the middle of nowhere." Erica promised she would before hanging up, but as the snow thickened, her options dwindled. The road was too narrow to safely stop, and the idea of waiting alone in the car as the storm raged around her was even less appealing. She kept driving, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, the beam of her headlights barely cutting through the flurry of snow. It was only when she rounded a sharp bend and saw the faint glow of a house in the distance that she felt a flicker of relief. It wasn't the cabin. She knew that much from the GPS, but it was a sign of civilization, and maybe a place to stop and ask for help if the storm got worse. As she approached, the details of the house came into view. It was old, with sagging eaves and darkened windows, but there were Christmas lights strung along the roofline, their multicolored glow fighting valiantly against the swirling snow. A faint plume of smoke rose from the chimney, confirming someone was home. She pulled into the driveway, her tires crunching over the fresh snow. She hesitated for a moment, peering at the house through her fogged windshield. It didn't look particularly welcoming, but at least it was warm, and the alternative was risking the rest of the drive in near-zero visibility. Erica grabbed her coat and stepped out of the car, the cold biting at her face. As she approached the porch, she noticed how oddly still the house seemed. There were no tracks in the snow leading to the door, no sign of movement inside. She knocked 3 times, the sound muffled by the wind. For a long moment, there was no response. Then, just as she was about to turn back to her car, the door creaked open. A woman stood there, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes shadowed with something Erica couldn't quite place. She wore a long, old-fashioned dress and an apron, as though she'd stepped out of another century. Her thin lips curved into a tight smile. "Lost in the storm, dear?" the woman asked, her voice soft but carrying an unnatural edge. Erica hesitated, suddenly unsure if stopping here had been a good idea. I'm on my way to my family's cabin," she said. "But the roads are bad, and I thought I might—" Come in," the woman interrupted, stepping aside to let Erica enter. "No one should be out in this weather." The warmth inside was immediate, but it didn't soothe Erica's unease. The house smelled faintly of wood smoke and something else, something sweet and cloying, like rotting fruit. The decorations were elaborate, with garlands and candles adorning every surface, but they felt wrong somehow, like they belonged to a museum rather than a home. "I won't stay long," Erica said, glancing around. "Just need to wait for the storm to let up a bit." "Of course," the woman said, her smile never faltering. "Why don't you sit by the fire? You must be freezing." Erica nodded, grateful for the chance to warm up. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. She noticed a row of stockings hanging above the mantel, each one labeled with a name in delicate embroidery. Eleanor, Henry, Sophia. "Are these your children's?" Erica asked, trying to make polite conversation. The woman's smile faltered for just a moment, her eyes growing distant. "They were," she said quietly, before turning toward the kitchen. "Let me fetch you some tea." Erica sat down on the edge of a worn armchair, her nerves prickling with unease. Something about this house felt wrong. She glanced toward the stockings again, a chill running down her spine as she noticed the faint outlines of dust around them, as though they hadn't been touched in years. The woman returned with a steaming cup, her movements slow and deliberate. Erica thanked her and took a tentative sip, the tea warming her hands, but doing little to calm her nerves. "You're lucky you found us," the woman said, sitting across from her. "Not many people come this way anymore." Erica forced a smile. "Yeah, lucky." The woman tilted her head, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. "But the storm has a way of bringing people together, doesn't it?" Erica set the cup down, suddenly feeling lightheaded. Her vision blurred for a moment, and she shook her head, trying to clear it. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked, her voice thick with concern. "I'm fine," Erica said, though her words felt sluggish, her tongue heavy. The room seemed to tilt around her, the shadows growing darker, deeper. "Maybe you should lie down," the woman suggested, standing. "It's been such a long journey." Erica tried to protest, but her body wouldn't respond. The last thing she saw before the darkness swallowed her was the woman's smile. Sharp, too sharp, like the glint of a blade. Erica woke to darkness, the kind that pressed against her eyelids and smothered her breath. Her head throbbed, and her limbs felt heavy, as though she were sinking into the floor. She blinked, trying to make sense of her surroundings, and slowly realized she was lying on a bed, a cold, hard mattress that smelled faintly of mildew. The room was dimly lit by a single candle flickering on a wooden dresser. Shadows danced across the peeling wallpaper, their shapes grotesque and unnatural. Erica struggled to sit up, her movements sluggish. Her throat was dry, her voice raspy when she called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No answer, only the faint creak of the house settling, and the muffled sound of wind howling outside. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet touching the icy wooden floor. Her shoes were gone. So was her coat. Panic began to rise in her chest as fragmented memories came rushing back. The storm, the house, the tea. The woman's eerie smile. She stumbled to the door and twisted the knob. It didn't budge. Locked. Erica banged on it, shouting for help, but her voice echoed back at her, swallowed by the silence. She turned back to the room, searching for something, anything that might help her escape. That's when she saw it. On the dresser, next to the candle, was a picture frame. The glass was cracked, but the photograph inside was clear, a family portrait. The same woman who had let her in stood in the center, flanked by a man and two children. Their faces were solemn, almost somber, their eyes staring directly at the camera. There was something unnerving about the photo, as if the figures within it were alive, watching her. Beneath the frame was a handwritten note, the ink faded but legible. "The storm takes what it is owed." Erica's stomach twisted. She grabbed the frame and turned it over, hoping for a clue, but the back was blank. Frustrated, she placed it back on the dresser and turned her attention to the room. The window was her only hope. She pulled back the curtains, revealing glass fogged with frost. Beyond it, the snow had slowed, but the woods were cloaked in darkness. She tried to open the latch, but it was stuck, frozen shut. She banged on the glass, hoping to weaken it, but the noise only seemed to rattle the silence further. Behind her, the floorboards groaned. Erica froze, her heart pounding. Slowly, she turned, expecting to see the woman standing in the doorway. But the room was empty. The candle flickered violently, casting the shadows into a frenzy. Erica's breath quickened as the air grew colder, and the faint sound of laughter drifted into the room. It was high-pitched and distant, like the giggle of a child carried on the wind. She pressed herself against the window, her hands trembling as she tried once more to pry it open. The laughter grew louder, closer, until it felt as if it were coming from just behind her. "Don't fight it," a voice whispered, low and melodic. "It's already begun." Erica spun around, her back pressed against the glass. The room was empty, but the shadows were moving, shifting as though alive. She grabbed the candle and held it out in front of her, its small flame flickering wildly. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "What do you want from me?" The laughter stopped, replaced by a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. The shadows coalesced in the corner of the room, taking on a shape, a figure, tall and thin. Its features indistinct, but its presence unmistakably menacing. "You shouldn't have come," the voice said, though the figure's lips didn't move. "This place is not for you." Erica's grip on the candle faltered, the wax dripping onto her fingers. "I didn't mean to. I just needed shelter from the storm." "The storm brought you here," the figure said, its tone neither angry nor kind. "And now you belong to it." Before Erica could respond, the candle flickered out, plunging the room into darkness. She screamed, stumbling backward into the dresser. The photograph crashed to the floor, the glass shattering. The shadows closed in, suffocating, until she could feel them against her skin. And then, just as suddenly, the door creaked open. A faint light spilled into the room, and Erica didn't hesitate. She bolted through the doorway, her bare feet slapping against the cold wooden floor. The hallway was narrow and seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. She turned left, her instincts screaming at her to get as far from the room as possible. The house was a maze. Every turn led to another corridor. Every door she tried was locked. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her chest tight with fear. She could hear footsteps behind her, slow, deliberate, matching her every move. "Erica," the voice called, sing-song and mocking. "You can't run forever." She didn't look back. She couldn't. Her only thought was to escape, to get out of this house and back to her car. The hallway ahead seemed to twist and warp, the walls bending in ways that defied logic. The air grew colder, and the sound of the footsteps was joined by the faint clinking of chains. Finally, she reached a staircase. She didn't hesitate, taking the steps two at a time, her hand gripping the rickety banister. The stairs creaked under her weight, each sound a deafening crack in the suffocating silence. At the bottom, she found herself in a large, dimly lit room. The fireplace was roaring, its flames unnaturally high and bright. The woman was there, standing in front of the fire, her hands clasped in front of her. "You should have stayed in the room," the woman said, her voice calm but laced with something dark. "It would have been easier that way." "Let me go," Erica pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Please, I just want to go home." The woman tilted her head, her expression almost pitying. "Home? There's no going back. Not once the storm has chosen you. What does that even mean?" Erica shouted, her voice breaking. "Why are you doing this?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she stepped aside, revealing something behind her. A door. It was tall and ornate, its surface carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe in the firelight. "That's your way out," the woman said, "but you won't like what's on the other side." Erica didn't care. She darted toward the door, her fingers fumbling with the handle. The woman didn't try to stop her, didn't move at all as Erica pulled the door open and stepped through. The cold hit her like a wall, and she stumbled forward, falling into the snow. She looked up, expecting to see the woods, her car, anything familiar. But the landscape was barren, an endless expanse of ice and snow stretching in all directions. The sky above was dark, swirling with unnatural colors. The wind howled, carrying with it the sound of distant laughter. Behind her, the house was gone. Erica fell to her knees, her breath visible in the freezing air. She was alone, utterly and completely alone, in a place that shouldn't exist, and somewhere in the distance, the storm was watching.